Beneath the desert sands of Iraq, archaeologists recently unearthed clay tablets that shouldn't exist. These aren't just ancient shopping lists or tax records. They're detailed technical manuals describing genetic engineering, astronomical charts mapping planets we didn't discover until the 1800s, and historical accounts of beings who came from the stars. The establishment wants you to believe these are myths, primitive stories told by people who didn't understand their world. But when you actually read what's written, when you look at the mathematics and the specificity, something else emerges. A possibility so profound it threatens to collapse every assumption we hold about human origins. The tablets speak of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from a planet called Nibiru and created humanity for a purpose we're only beginning to understand. This isn't ancient aliens pseudoscience. This is what the Sumerians themselves recorded in their own words, on imperishable clay 6,000 years ago. Before we go further, understand what we're dealing with. Sumeria is not a disputed civilization. It's the foundation of everything we call modern society. They invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, law codes, and urban planning. The wheel, the plough, the sailboat, all Sumerian. These weren't primitive people drawing stick figures in caves. They were sophisticated engineers and administrators who built cities housing tens of thousands of people with complex irrigation systems and multi-story buildings. And they left us a library, thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, baked hard as stone, immune to decay, scattered across ancient Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq. Most of these tablets are mundane, business contracts, grain inventories, legal disputes, but hidden among the bureaucratic records are texts that describe something entirely different. Texts that scholars have traditionally labelled as mythology because the alternative is too uncomfortable to consider. Let me show you what they actually say. The Sumerian creation epic, the Eridu Genesis, doesn't begin with a god speaking the world into existence. It begins with a planet. The tablets describe our solar system in shocking detail. They list the sun, the moon, and the planets, but they include one more, a massive world on a long elliptical orbit that passes through the inner solar system every 3,600 years. They called it Nibiru, which translates to planet of the crossing. Here's where it gets strange. The Sumerians knew about planets that are invisible to the naked eye. Uranus wasn't discovered by modern science until 1781, Neptune in 1846. Yet Sumerian cylinder seals from 4,500 years ago show diagrams of the solar system with all the planets in their correct positions, sizes roughly to scale, with the sun at the centre. How? The standard explanation is that it's just artistic representation, that the circular objects mean something else entirely. But the tablets themselves describe these objects as celestial bodies with specific orbital periods and characteristics. The Enuma Elish, another creation text, describes Nibiru in motion. It says this planet collided with another world called Tiamat, splitting it in half. One half became Earth. The other half was shattered into fragments that formed the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. This isn't poetic metaphor. The text provides mechanical details. It describes gravitational effects, orbital perturbations, and the sequence of impacts with a precision that sounds like a scientific report. Modern planetary formation theory actually supports the idea of massive collisions in the early solar system. The leading explanation for how Earth got its moon involves a Mars-sized object called Theia smashing into the primordial Earth. The asteroid belt is thought by some researchers to be the remains of a planet that never fully formed, possibly disrupted by a massive gravitational event. The Sumerian account describes exactly this kind of cosmic violence, written thousands of years before we had the physics to understand it was even possible. But the tablets don't just describe planets, they describe who lived on them. The Anunnaki are mentioned in hundreds of texts. The word breaks down linguistically as those who from heaven to earth came. Not spiritual beings, not metaphorical forces of nature, physical entities who travelled here. The texts are explicit about this. They describe the Anunnaki arriving in spacecraft, establishing bases and mining operations. They built cities with names we can still find in the archaeological record. Eridu, the first city, was said to be founded by Enki, the Anunnaki's chief scientist. Why did they come? According to the tablets, they needed gold, not for jewelry or currency, for survival. Their planet's atmosphere was deteriorating, and they needed gold particles suspended in the upper atmosphere to reflect heat and stabilize their climate. Earth had gold, lots of it. So they came here and started mining. The tablets describe a hierarchy. At the top was Anu, the ruler of Nibiru. His two sons, Enki and Enlil, were sent to Earth to oversee operations. Enki was the scientist, the engineer, the one who understood genetics and biology. Enlil was the administrator, the military commander, the enforcer. These weren't abstract gods. They had personalities, motivations, and conflicts. The tablets read like historical documents about real political figures. For thousands of years, the Anunnaki did the mining themselves, but the work was brutal. The lower-ranking Anunnaki, called the Igigi, laboured in the gold mines of Africa, and eventually they revolted. The texts describe this mutiny in detail. The workers threw down their tools and marched on the leadership demanding relief. This is where humanity enters the story. Enki proposed a solution. There was already a primitive hominid species on Earth, what we would now identify as Homo erectus. Enki suggested upgrading this species genetically to create a worker race, a biological robot that could handle the mining work. The tablets describe the process with uncomfortable specificity. They talk about extracting essence from the Anunnaki and combining it with the clay of the earth creature. They describe in vitro fertilization, with Anunnaki females serving as birth mothers for the first hybrid beings. The text uses the term Lulu for these first humans. It means mixed one, or primitive worker. We were created to be a labour force. That's not interpretation. That's what the tablets explicitly state. This seems like obvious mythology until you look at what modern genetics has discovered. Homo sapiens appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. But here's the problem. We appeared suddenly. There's no smooth gradual transition in the fossil record from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Instead, there's a gap, and then fully modern humans just show up with larger brains, sophisticated tool use, and symbolic thinking. Evolutionary biologists call this rapid appearance, punctuated equilibrium, but they struggle to explain what caused such a dramatic leap in such a short time span. The human genome contains another mystery. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Our closest genetic relatives, chimpanzees and other great apes, have 24 pairs. At some point in our past, 2 chromosomes fused together. This fusion is visible in our DNA. Chromosome 2 in humans shows clear evidence of being 2 separate chromosomes that merged. This doesn't happen naturally in evolution. It's the kind of thing you'd expect from genetic manipulation. There's more. The FOXP2 gene, crucial for speech and language, shows signs of recent rapid mutation in humans. It's nearly identical across all mammals, then suddenly in humans, it has specific changes that appeared roughly 200,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans emerged. These changes gave us the physical ability to produce complex speech. Language, the thing that separates us from every other species, appeared in a genetic instant. The tablets describe Enki refining his creation over multiple generations. The first attempts produced beings that were too primitive. Later versions were more capable, but still limited. Finally, he created a version that was intelligent, strong, and capable of following complex instructions. This wasn't the end of tinkering. The texts describe ongoing genetic adjustments, creating different lines of humans with different capabilities. One fascinating detail appears repeatedly. The Anunnaki had much longer lifespans than humans. The tablets list kings who ruled for thousands of years. Mainstream scholars dismiss these as exaggerated mythical reigns. But what if the numbers are accurate, just counted differently? If you're from a planet with a 3,600-year orbit, that's your year. A king who ruled for 2 Nibiru years would have ruled for 7,200 Earth years. The math suddenly works. The Sumerian King List is an actual archaeological document that lists every ruler of Sumeria and the length of their reign. The early kings before a great flood have impossibly long reigns. After the flood, the reign lengths become normal human lifespans. The transition point is marked clearly. It's as if 2 different species were ruling, one with extended lifespans and one without. This brings us to the flood. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, we know this. But the Sumerian version, which predates the biblical account by at least 1,000 years, provides details that the others don't. It describes the flood as a deliberate act by the Anunnaki leadership, specifically by Enlil. According to the tablets, Enlil had grown tired of humanity. We were too noisy, too numerous, too problematic. When the Anunnaki detected that Nibiru's next passage through the inner solar system would cause massive gravitational disruptions, triggering the Antarctic ice sheet to slide into the ocean and create a global flood, Enlil saw an opportunity. He ordered the Anunnaki to say nothing. Let the humans drown. Start over. But Enki defied him. He went to his favourite human, a man named Ziusudra in Sumerian texts, Utnapishtim in Akkadian, and Noah in Hebrew. He warned him of the coming flood and instructed him to build a vessel to save his family and genetic samples of Earth's animals. This wasn't a wooden boat carrying 2 of every species. The description in the tablets is of a sealed, navigable craft designed to survive massive waves. When the flood came, it was catastrophic. The texts describe walls of water covering the mountains, cities swept away, the sky darkened for days. When it finally receded, the Anunnaki were shaken. They looked down from their orbital stations and realized they'd nearly wiped out their entire creation. The tablets describe them weeping, regretting the decision. Enlil was furious when he discovered Enki had saved humans, but it was too late. Humanity survived, and after this near extinction, the relationship changed. The Anunnaki could no longer treat humans as disposable slaves. A new arrangement was needed. This is where the story shifts. After the flood, around 10,000 BC according to the timeline in the tablets, the Anunnaki began teaching humanity. They gave us agriculture. They showed us how to domesticate animals, how to irrigate fields, how to build permanent cities. The sudden appearance of civilization in Sumeria, around 3,800 BC, emerging fully formed with writing, mathematics, and complex social organization, wasn't a natural evolution. It was a knowledge transfer. The tablets list the Me, which translates roughly as divine powers or cultural foundations. These were specific pieces of knowledge and technology that the Anunnaki gave to humanity. The list includes kingship, priesthood, warfare, music, metalworking, writing, and over 100 other skills and concepts. They weren't discovered gradually, they were taught, downloaded, if you will, from one civilization to another. Every major Sumerian city was said to be founded by a specific Anunnaki and given a specific function. Eridu was the first, Enki's city, focused on wisdom and water management. Nippur was Enlil's city, the administrative capital. Uruk was given to Inanna, the goddess of love and war. These weren't religious assignments. The tablets describe them as administrative zones in a controlled territory. The relationship between the Anunnaki and humans was complex. Some Anunnaki, particularly those in Enki's faction, seemed to genuinely care about humanity. Others saw us as tools. The tablets are filled with stories of conflicts between Anunnaki leaders, with humans caught in the middle, used as soldiers in their wars. One of the most disturbing patterns in the texts is the Anunnaki's obsession with bloodlines. Certain human families were chosen to rule. Kings were selected based on their genetic heritage, their percentage of Anunnaki DNA. The tablets describe Anunnaki taking human wives and producing hybrid offspring who became the rulers of cities. These hybrid bloodlines were carefully tracked and maintained. This explains something historians struggle with. Why did ancient kings claim divine right to rule? Why were royal bloodlines so important that kingdoms would collapse into civil war rather than let the wrong family take the throne? If you're actually breeding a specific genetic line to maintain certain traits, suddenly the obsession with pure bloodlines makes sense. It's not superstition, it's genetics. The tablets describe these hybrid rulers as having extended lifespans, greater intelligence, and physical abilities beyond normal humans. They were the bridge between the Anunnaki and humanity, the priest kings, the pharaohs, the demigods of Greek mythology. Every ancient culture has stories of heroes who were half god, half human. The Sumerian texts suggest this wasn't mythology at all. What's striking is how consistent the details are across thousands of tablets, written over thousands of years by different scribes in different cities. This isn't one person's creative invention, it's a persistent historical narrative that was treated as fact by the people recording it. They weren't writing mythology, they were writing history. Modern archaeology has confirmed details from the tablets that once seemed impossible. The city of Ur, described in great detail in Sumerian texts, was thought to be mythical until it was excavated. Same with Uruk. Same with Nippur. Every city mentioned in the tablets has been found exactly where the text said it would be. The trade routes described in economic tablets match archaeological evidence of ancient commerce. The legal codes preserved in the tablets influenced later Babylonian and eventually Roman law. These weren't ignorant primitives making up stories. They were documenting their world with the same attention to detail we use today. So when they describe their origins, when they explain where their knowledge came from, why do we automatically dismiss it as fantasy? The most recent translations of previously unexamined tablets are revealing even more disturbing details. References to genetic experiments that failed. Descriptions of human-animal hybrids created and destroyed. Accounts of technological warfare between Anunnaki factions that destroyed cities with weapons that sound like nuclear devices. One newly translated tablet describes a conflict between Enki and Enlil that escalated to the use of weapons of terror that could turn cities to dust and poison the land for generations. The description matches nuclear fallout. And strangely, we find archaeological evidence of ancient cities in the Middle East that were vitrified, turned to glass by extreme heat. Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan shows radiation levels and blast patterns consistent with a nuclear explosion. The site dates to roughly 2000 BC. The timeline the tablets provide is about to become relevant again. If Nibiru truly has a 3,600-year orbit, and its last passage caused the flood around 10,000 BC, when is the next one? The math is simple and terrifying. We're approaching the window, and if the texts are accurate, the Anunnaki don't just pass by, they return. This isn't about believing or disbelieving, it's about looking at what's actually written in humanity's oldest historical records and asking why those records describe things they shouldn't have known. Why they describe genetic engineering before we understood DNA. Why they describe planetary collisions before we understood orbital mechanics. Why they describe a hidden planet that modern astronomy is now actively searching for. The establishment narrative is that ancient people were superstitious and primitive, that they invented gods to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. But what if we have it backwards? What if they understood exactly what they were describing and we're the ones who've forgotten? The Sumerian tablets aren't asking us to believe in magic. They're providing a technical historical account of our origins, an account that's becoming harder to dismiss as archaeology, genetics, and astronomy keep finding evidence that supports it. Everything you're about to discover is documented. These aren't fringe theories pulled from nowhere. They're direct translations of texts that have been sitting in museums for over a century, waiting for us to take them seriously. The academic world has spent decades trying to fit these texts into a comfortable mythological framework, because the alternative rewrites everything. But the texts themselves don't care about our comfort. They describe a reality where humanity is a created species, where our creators came from another planet, and where that planet is scheduled to return. The evidence isn't hidden in conspiracy theories or secret documents. It's written in plain Sumerian on clay tablets you can visit in the British Museum or the Louvre. The question isn't whether the Anunnaki existed. The tablets make that claim directly. The question is whether we're ready to examine the evidence honestly, without the filter of assumptions about what ancient people could or couldn't have known. Because if they were right about the planets, right about the genetics, right about the catastrophic floods, what else were they right about? And more importantly, what does it mean if they're right about the return? The Sumerian King List is where the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't a religious text or a collection of myths. It's a bureaucratic document, a sequential record of rulers that governed the Mesopotamian city-states, listing their names, their cities, and the length of their reigns. Standard historical documentation. Except for one problem. The numbers don't make sense. Not to us anyway. Before the Great Flood, according to the list, kings reigned for tens of thousands of years. Enlil, the first king of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. Algar ruled for 36,000 years. Enlil held power for 43,200 years. 8 kings total, spanning 241,200 years of pre-flood history. Then the flood comes. The tablet states it plainly. The flood swept over. After the waters recede, kingship descends from heaven again. But something has changed. The post-flood kings still have impossibly long reigns by our standards, but they're dramatically shorter. Suddenly we're looking at reigns of hundreds or low thousands of years instead of tens of thousands. Then as we move closer to historically verified periods, the numbers drop further into ranges that match normal human lifespans. Mainstream archaeology treats the pre-flood section as pure mythology. The reasoning is simple. Humans don't live for 30,000 years. Therefore, these can't be real historical records. Case closed. But this dismissal ignores something critical. The Sumerians were obsessive record keepers. They documented grain harvests, tax collections, and trade transactions with mathematical precision. Their entire civilization was built on accounting. Why would they suddenly abandon accuracy and inject fantasy into what is clearly meant to be an administrative document? And why would the fantasy be so specific? These aren't round numbers, they're precise figures that follow mathematical patterns. Sitchin's interpretation cuts through the confusion. He argued these weren't Earth years. They were Shah, a Sumerian unit meaning both year and orbit, but not an Earth orbit, a Nibiru orbit. 1 Shah equals 1 complete revolution of Nibiru around the Sun, 3,600 Earth years. When you divide the reign lengths by 3,600, the numbers suddenly become reasonable. Alulim's 28,800 year reign becomes 8 Nibiru years. Algar's 36,000 years becomes 10 Nibiru years. Enlil's 43,200 years becomes 12 Nibiru years. These are normal, believable reign lengths for leaders of an advanced civilization. The King List isn't mythology, it's a conversion error. We've been reading it in the wrong units. This explains the dramatic drop after the flood. The post-flood kings weren't Anunnaki. They were hybrids, part human, part Anunnaki. The Nephilim, giants, demigods, whatever name different cultures gave them. These hybrid rulers had extended lifespans, longer than pure humans, but shorter than their Anunnaki parents. As the Anunnaki bloodline diluted further through subsequent generations, lifespans decreased until they normalized to standard human ranges. The King List isn't describing mythology, it's describing genetics, the gradual dilution of an alien genome across generations. But there's something else in the list that's even more disturbing. The text describes kingship descending from heaven, multiple times, not metaphorically. The Sumerian word used is An, which specifically means sky or heaven. Kingship didn't emerge from human populations. It was installed from above, repeatedly. The implication is clear. Leadership wasn't an organic human development. It was an imported system. The Anunnaki established the first governments, appointed the first rulers, and created the hierarchical power structures that persist to this day. We didn't invent civilization, we were given it, and the bloodlines that ruled then might still be ruling now. The tablets describe a specific event that triggered the flood. It wasn't divine punishment for human sin. It was a calculated decision made during a council of the Anunnaki. They knew Nibiru's return would cause catastrophic tidal disruptions. The Antarctic ice sheet would destabilize and slide into the ocean, creating a global tsunami. Enlil, the commander of the Earth mission, saw this as an opportunity. Humanity had become too numerous, too loud, too problematic. The solution was simple: let them drown. He forced the other Anunnaki to swear an oath of secrecy. No warnings, no interventions. Let the reset happen. Enki disagreed. He had developed something the other Anunnaki hadn't: attachment, possibly even love. He saw humanity not as tools but as children. When he learned of Enlil's plan, he couldn't stay silent. The tablets describe him visiting a man named Ziusudra, who the Hebrews would later call Noah. Enki didn't speak to him directly. That would violate his oath. Instead, he spoke to a reed wall, while Ziusudra happened to be on the other side, listening. A technicality, divine loophole. He instructed Ziusudra to build a submersible vessel, gave him precise dimensions, and told him to seal it with bitumen. This wasn't a wooden ark for animals. It was a survival capsule. The Sumerian description matches a submarine more than a boat. When Nibiru's passage triggered the ice sheet collapse, the wave came. The tablets described the Anunnaki themselves fleeing to their orbital platforms, watching from space as the waters consumed everything. Even they were terrified. The flood lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. When the waters finally receded, Ziusudra's vessel came to rest on a mountain. He emerged to find a world scrubbed clean. Enlil was furious that humans survived, but Enki convinced him it was fate. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but under stricter management. The Anunnaki would elevate human civilization, teach them agriculture and architecture, but maintain control through hybrid bloodline rulers who would govern on their behalf. This is where the timeline becomes critically important. Most flood myths place the event around 10,000 to 12,000 BC, the end of the last ice age. The younger Dryas impact. Geological evidence confirms a catastrophic flood event in this period. Sea levels rose by 400 feet as glaciers melted. Coastal civilizations would have been completely erased. If the flood was triggered by Nibiru's passage around 10,800 BC, and Nibiru has a 3,600-year orbit, simple math tells us when it returns. 10,800 BC plus 3,600 years brings us to 7,200 BC. Add another 3,600 and we reach 3,600 BC. One more cycle lands us at year 0. The next passage would be 3,600 AD. We're over halfway through the current cycle, except the math isn't that simple. Orbits decay. Gravitational interactions with other planets cause perturbations. The orbit could be shorter now than it was 12,000 years ago. Some researchers analysing the tablets and correlating them with historical catastrophe events suggest the orbit has shortened to around 3,450 years or less. That shifts the timeline significantly. If the last major passage was around 1600 BC, an event that correlates with the Bronze Age collapse, the next return could be much closer. Perhaps within this century, perhaps within decades. The conspiracy isn't just that governments know about Nibiru, it's that they've known for a long time. The suppression started the moment the tablets were translated. In the late 1800s, when cuneiform was first decoded, scholars immediately recognized the explosive nature of what they were reading. These weren't primitive myths. They were technical accounts that described human origins in ways that contradicted both religious doctrine and emerging evolutionary theory. The church couldn't accept that humans were genetically engineered by aliens. Science couldn't accept that civilization appeared suddenly rather than gradually. So a compromise was reached. The tablets would be classified as mythology. Interesting stories, nothing more. The academic establishment would focus on the cultural and literary aspects while carefully avoiding any suggestion that the content might be factually accurate. But some researchers didn't get the memo, or they got it and ignored it. They continued translating, correlating the Sumerian accounts with archaeological evidence, astronomical data, and genetic research. What they found was a pattern of suppression. Discoveries that supported the Anunnaki narrative were buried, defunded, or ridiculed. Researchers who pushed too hard found their careers destroyed. The message was clear: you can study the tablets, but don't take them seriously. This suppression extends to modern astronomy. When Pioneer 10 and 11 showed anomalous deceleration in the outer solar system, it suggested an unknown gravitational source. When Voyager detected unexpected trajectories, it pointed to the same thing. These anomalies were eventually explained away, attributed to thermal recoil or calculation errors. But were they? Or was there pressure to find alternative explanations because confirming a massive planet X would validate Sitchin and open a door the establishment desperately wants to keep closed? The IRA satellite incident in 1983 is the smoking gun. The Washington Post article wasn't vague. It quoted scientists saying they'd found something possibly as large as Jupiter in the direction of Orion. The object was real enough to warrant a front-page story. Then, within 24 hours, a retraction. A distant galaxy, they said. A misunderstanding. But astronomers don't confuse galaxies with planets. Galaxies are massive collections of billions of stars. Planets are single objects. The spectral signatures are completely different. The retraction wasn't a correction. It was damage control. They found something, and someone made a call to bury it. Robert Harrington's death adds another layer. He wasn't a fringe theorist. He was the chief astronomer at the US Naval Observatory, one of the most prestigious positions in American astronomy. He had the credentials, the equipment, and the institutional backing to conduct a legitimate search for Planet X. In the early 1990s, he was closing in. He'd calculated a position, he'd planned observation missions, and he was preparing to go public with findings. Then he died, rapidly, from a rare aggressive cancer, at 50 years old, just before his scheduled announcement. The timing is suspicious enough that even mainstream researchers privately acknowledge it's strange. But publicly, silence. You don't question the deaths of respected scientists. You don't suggest foul play. You move on. The modern search for Planet 9 is the establishment's attempt to control the narrative. By allowing limited disclosure, they can frame the discovery on their terms. It becomes a distant academic curiosity rather than an existential threat. They can set the orbital parameters at 10,000 to 20,000 years, ensuring the public sees no immediate danger. They can strip away all connection to ancient texts, to the Anunnaki, to any suggestion that this planet is inhabited or has been here before. It becomes sterile science, safe, manageable, the truth wrapped in a lie. But the timeline won't stay buried. Too many independent researchers are correlating the data. Too many amateurs have telescopes and software that can detect objects NASA won't acknowledge. The internet has made information suppression nearly impossible. Every leak, every whistleblower, every anomalous observation gets documented and shared. The walls are cracking, and what's behind those walls is a truth that will force humanity to confront the most fundamental questions we've spent millennia avoiding. Who are we? Where did we come from? And what happens when our creators return? The evidence isn't just buried in classified files or ancient tablets. It's written in stone carved into the oldest structures on Earth, monuments so precise and massive that even our modern technology struggles to explain them. These aren't primitive piles of rock. They're sophisticated machines, encoded with astronomical data, built to survive the very catastrophe they warned about. And when you decode their message, you find the same story. A cyclical destroyer, a celestial clock, and a countdown that's running out. Start with the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're told it's a tomb built around 2500 BC by the pharaoh Khufu using copper tools and wooden ramps. The problem? There's no body, no hieroglyphs, no evidence it was ever used for burial. What it does have is mathematical precision that shouldn't exist. The pyramid's base is level to within 2 centimeters across 230 meters. Its sides are aligned to true north with an error of only 3/60ths of a degree. Try achieving that with copper chisels and guesswork. The structure contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 70 tons, fitted so perfectly that you can't slide a razor blade between them. The internal chambers are built from granite transported from quarries 500 miles away, cut and polished to tolerances we associate with modern optics, not ancient masonry. But the real message is in the numbers. The pyramid encodes the dimensions of the Earth. The ratio of its perimeter to its height equals 2 pi, the same ratio as the Earth's circumference to its radius. Multiply the pyramid's height by 43,200 and you get the polar radius of Earth. Not approximately, exactly. The number 43,200 isn't random. It's a key precessional number appearing in mythologies worldwide, representing 1/6 of the 25,920-year cycle of axial precession. The pyramid is a scale model of the Northern Hemisphere, a 3-dimensional map of the planet built by people who supposedly didn't know the Earth was round. The Sphinx tells an even older story. Geologist Robert Schoch examined the weathering patterns on its body and found vertical erosion channels, the kind caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. The last time the Giza Plateau experienced rainfall of that intensity was before 10,000 BC, at the end of the last ice age. This means the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by at least 7,000 years. The ancient Egyptians didn't build it. They found it, buried in sand, and restored it. The original builders are unknown, lost to the cataclysm that drowned their civilization when the ice melted and the seas rose. Travel to Peru, and the impossible masonry gets even more disturbing. At Sacsayhuaman, outside Cusco, massive limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together in complex polygonal patterns. Some stones have 12 angles, fitting perfectly, with neighbours on all sides. There's no mortar. The joints are so tight that seismic activity makes the stones dance together rather than collapse. When the Spanish conquistadors asked the Inca who built these walls, the Inca said they didn't know. The walls were already ancient when their ancestors arrived. They called the builders the people from before. 40 miles from Cusco sits Ollantaytambo, where massive megalithic blocks are perched on a mountain terrace. The stones weren't quarried nearby. They came from a site 6 miles away, across a river, up a mountain. Each block weighs between 50 and 70 tons. Moving them today would require cranes, flatbed trucks, and engineered roads. The official explanation is that thousands of workers used log rollers and rope, but logs would be crushed under that weight. Rope would snap. The terrain is too steep, too broken. It's not just difficult, it's impossible, unless they had a different technology, something we've lost. The stones themselves show evidence of this lost technology. Many have a glassy, vitrified surface, as if exposed to extreme heat. Others have precise drill holes that go straight down into the granite, something that requires diamond-tipped bits spinning at high speed. The acoustic properties of these sites are equally strange. At the temple of Chavin de Huantar, underground chambers amplify sound at specific frequencies, between 60 and 115 Hz, frequencies known to alter human brain activity and induce trance states. These weren't just buildings, they were psychoacoustic devices designed to manipulate consciousness. Then there's Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, the site that shattered the archaeological timeline. Discovered in 1994, it consists of massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing 20 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals. Carbon dating places it at 9,600 BC, making it 6,000 years older than Stonehenge and 7,000 years older than the pyramids. According to the Standard Model, the people of this era were hunter-gatherers who hadn't invented pottery, metalworking, or writing. Yet here they were, quarrying, transporting, and erecting multi-ton stones with astronomical precision. The site wasn't destroyed. It was deliberately buried under thousands of tons of soil, as if the builders were creating a time capsule, preserving their knowledge for a future generation that would have the technology to excavate and understand it. One pillar at Gobekli Tepe is particularly haunting. Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone, contains carvings that researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis argue represent a star map. The animals carved into the stone correspond to constellations, and the arrangement matches the night sky as it appeared around 10,950 BC. At the centre of the composition is a circle with a small dot, possibly representing the sun, and above it, a headless human figure. Sweatman interprets this as a record of a cataclysmic event, a comet strike that triggered the younger Dryas impact. The headless figure represents death, civilization decapitated. The date encoded in the stone is 10,950 BC, exactly 13,000 years ago, aligning perfectly with the geological and climatological evidence of the younger Dryas event. This isn't mythology. It's a warning carved in stone. The message repeats at sites across the globe. In Egypt, the Dendera zodiac, a ceiling carving in the Temple of Hathor, shows the constellations as they appeared around 10,500 BC, not during the temple's known construction date. In Central America, the Mayan calendar tracks vast cycles of time, including the Long Count, which measures epochs of 5,125 years. The most recent cycle ended on December 21st, 2012, a date that sparked global anxiety and conspiracy theories. The Maya didn't predict the end of the world. They predicted the end of an age, a transition point in the cosmic cycle. Whether that transition is gradual or catastrophic depends on the forces at play. The precision of these structures suggests they weren't built as monuments to kings or gods. They were built as instruments, observatories designed to track the movements of the heavens and predict the return of the destroyer. The ancient builders knew something we've forgotten. The sky's a clock, and when certain alignments occur, when certain celestial bodies appear in specific positions, the cataclysm engine activates. These megalithic sites are the alarm system, warning future generations when the window of danger approaches. The conspiracy here is that modern archaeology and Egyptology refuse to acknowledge the implications. To admit that the Sphinx is 12,000 years old is to admit that a high civilization existed before the accepted dawn of civilization. To admit that Gobekli Tepe was built by an advanced society is to admit our entire timeline is wrong. The academic establishment has spent over a century constructing a narrative of linear progress, from primitive to advanced, from stone tools to skyscrapers. Accepting these anomalies would require tearing down that narrative and starting over. Careers would be destroyed, textbooks would be worthless, funding would evaporate, so the evidence is ignored, dismissed, or explained away with increasingly absurd theories involving thousands of slaves, wooden sledges, and unlimited time. But the stones don't lie. They can't be revised or retracted. They stand as physical proof that we are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. And encoded within their geometry and alignment is the same message repeated across every ancient culture. The destroyer returns. The cycle repeats. And the countdown is synchronized with the precession of the equinoxes, a 25,920-year cycle that the ancients tracked obsessively because they knew it governed the seasons of catastrophe. We're told the ancients were obsessed with the stars because they were primitive, superstitious, assigning meaning to random lights in the sky. But what if they were tracking the stars because they knew the stars held the key to survival? What if these megalithic structures weren't built to worship gods but to calculate, to predict, to prepare? The precision required to align a structure to true north or to encode the dimensions of the Earth isn't accidental. It's intentional, it's a message, and we're only now beginning to learn how to read it. The question is whether we'll decode it in time. The ancients weren't just tracking stars for spiritual reasons, they were monitoring a threat, a celestial body that returns on a schedule so vast it exceeds the lifespan of empires. This brings us to the most controversial piece of the puzzle, the physical evidence that a massive object has passed through our solar system in recorded history and left its fingerprints on our planet. Let's start with a geological mystery that mainstream science struggles to explain. Around 12,800 years ago, something catastrophic happened to Earth. The planet was warming, emerging from the last ice age, glaciers retreating, and life flourishing. Then suddenly, violently, the climate reversed. Temperatures plummeted. The world was thrown back into a deep freeze that lasted over 1,000 years. This event is called the Younger Dryas, named after an Arctic wildflower that reappeared in Europe during this sudden cold snap. For decades, scientists had no explanation. Climate doesn't just reverse like flipping a switch. But then came the evidence of impact. In 2007, a team of researchers found a black layer of sediment in soil cores, dating exactly to the Younger Dryas boundary. Inside this layer were microscopic diamonds, nanodiamonds that only form under extreme pressure and heat. There were magnetic spherules, tiny balls of vaporized rock that cooled in mid-air. There were elevated levels of iridium and platinum, elements rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids and comets. The signature was unmistakable. Something from space had hit us. The theory that emerged is terrifying in its simplicity. A comet, likely several kilometers wide, fragmented as it entered our atmosphere and exploded over the North American ice sheet. The impact didn't leave a traditional crater because it hit ice, not rock. Instead, it acted as a thermal bomb. Millions of tons of ice vaporized instantly, sending steam and debris into the stratosphere, blocking the sun and triggering a nuclear winter. The shock waves destabilized the remaining ice sheets, causing them to slide into the ocean and generating mega tsunamis that swept across continents. This wasn't a regional disaster. It was a planetary reset button. The geological evidence supports this. Ice cores from Greenland show a massive spike in ammonium and soot at the Younger Dryas boundary, indicating that roughly 10% of Earth's biomass burned. The world was on fire. Then it froze. Then it flooded. It was a 3-stage apocalypse, and it wiped out the North American megafauna. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, all gone within a geological instant. It also decimated the Clovis people, the dominant human culture in North America at the time. But here's where it gets stranger. This impact event aligns perfectly with the global flood myths. Every ancient culture has a story of a great deluge that destroyed the world. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes Utnapishtim surviving a flood sent by the gods. The Bible tells of Noah and the Ark. Hindu texts speak of Manu being warned by a fish god to build a boat. Greek mythology has Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Aztecs, the Chinese, the Aboriginal Australians all have nearly identical stories. A righteous man is warned by a divine being, builds a vessel, saves his family and animals, and repopulates the earth after the waters recede. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these as coincidental myths born from local flooding events, but the details are too consistent. The global nature of the stories, the specific mention of divine warning, the preservation of seeds and animals, the sending of birds to find land. These aren't independent inventions, they're fragmented memories of a single planetary catastrophe. The younger Dryas impact provides the mechanism. The comet caused the ice melt caused the floods. The survivors scattered across the globe passed down the story in the only format that could survive, oral tradition encoded into myth. If a comet impact 12,800 years ago caused this level of destruction, the question becomes, where did the comet come from? Random comets from the Oort cloud are possible, but statistically unlikely to hit Earth with such devastating precision. This is where the Nibiru theory provides an elegant, if unproven, answer. If a massive planetary body passes through the inner solar system every few thousand years, its gravitational influence would destabilize the orbits of comets in the Kuiper belt and beyond, sending them hurtling toward the Sun and Earth. Nibiru wouldn't need to hit us directly. Its mere passage would turn the outer solar system into a cosmic shotgun, blasting debris into the inner planets. We would see it as a comet shower, a barrage of impacts over weeks or months. The Taurid meteor stream, which Earth passes through twice a year, is believed by some astronomers to contain fragments of a massive comet that broke apart thousands of years ago. Every year, in late June and early November, we cross this debris field and experience increased meteor activity. Most burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere, but occasionally larger fragments make it through. The Tunguska event of 1908, where an object exploded over Siberia with the force of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, flattening 800 square miles of forest, is believed to have been a Taurid fragment. No crater was found because it airburst before impact. Now imagine not one Tunguska event, but hundreds occurring simultaneously across the planet. That's the younger Dryas scenario. The evidence isn't just geological, it's written into our DNA. Genetic studies show that human populations experienced a severe bottleneck around this time. Our genetic diversity plummeted, indicating that we went through a near-extinction event. Only small isolated groups survived, likely those who had retreated to high ground or deep caves. When they emerged, they found a world transformed. The coastlines had shifted. The great cities of their ancestors, if they existed, were underwater. The knowledge was fragmented. This explains the sudden appearance of agriculture around 10,000 BC. It wasn't an invention. It was a rediscovery, a desperate attempt by the survivors to feed themselves in a harsh new climate. This brings us to the vitrified forts. Scattered across Scotland, Ireland, France and Turkey are ancient stone fortifications where the walls have been subjected to heat so intense, over 1,100 degrees Celsius, that the rocks melted into glass. Normal fires, even sustained wood fires, can't reach these temperatures. Some researchers suggest these are the result of plasma discharges from the sun or atmospheric explosions caused by comet fragments. The walls were vitrified in seconds by a flash of unimaginable heat. These aren't isolated anomalies. There are over 60 known vitrified forts in Scotland alone. They're the scorch marks of a planetary bombardment. Then there's the mystery of the Carolina Bays. Along the eastern seaboard of the United States, there are over 500,000 elliptical depressions, all aligned in the same direction, all pointing back toward the Great Lakes region. They look like massive impact craters, but they're too shallow and too numerous to be asteroid strikes. The leading theory is that they were created by secondary ejecta from the younger Dryas impact. When the comet hit the ice sheet, it threw billions of tons of ice, rock, and debris into the air. This material re-entered the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, slamming into the ground and creating these characteristic oval scars. The entire eastern United States was carpet-bombed by frozen shrapnel. The conspiracy here is the suppression of the impact hypothesis itself. For years, mainstream geology resisted the idea that catastrophic events shaped Earth's history. They clung to uniformitarianism, the belief that slow, gradual processes, not sudden disasters, were responsible for geological change. The younger Dryas impact threatened this worldview. It suggested that the planet could be reset violently and without warning. Funding for research into the impact theory was difficult to secure. Papers were rejected, researchers were marginalized. It took decades of accumulated evidence before the theory gained mainstream acceptance. And even now, there's resistance to exploring the full implications. Because if a comet impact nearly wiped us out 12,800 years ago, it can happen again. And if that comet was part of a debris field disturbed by a passing planetary body, then we're not dealing with a random threat. We're dealing with a predictable one. A cyclical doomsday clock governed by orbital mechanics. The establishment doesn't want to explore this because confirming it would require a complete re-evaluation of human history and a terrifying acknowledgement of our vulnerability. The timeline also raises disturbing questions about what was lost. If agriculture and civilization appeared suddenly around 10,000 BC, it implies that knowledge of these technologies existed before the cataclysm. The survivors weren't primitive hunter-gatherers stumbling into farming by accident. They were refugees of a high civilization, rebuilding from fragments. The Gobekli Tepe site in Turkey, dated to 9600 BC, shows advanced masonry and planning. These weren't people learning to stack rocks, they were people who already knew how. The site was deliberately buried, as if they were creating a time capsule, preserving their knowledge for future generations, who might one day rediscover it. This pattern repeats globally. The sudden appearance of megalithic construction, advanced astronomy, and complex societies in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica, all around the same time, suggests a coordinated effort. These weren't independent developments, they were the fragments of a lost global civilization, scattered survivors carrying seeds of knowledge to different corners of the earth, each group rebuilding according to what they remembered. The mythology supports this. The Egyptians spoke of the Tepe, the first time, and golden age ruled by gods before a great catastrophe. The Sumerians recorded that their knowledge was given to them by the Apkallu, 7 sages who came before the flood. The Hindu Vedas describe cycles of creation and destruction governed by cosmic time. The Maya track these cycles obsessively, knowing that the universe operates in rhythms. We're living in the amnesia period, the gap between the last reset and the growing awareness that another is coming. So when does the cycle repeat? If the younger Dryas impact was caused by a debris field disturbed by a passing planetary body, we need to calculate when that body returns. The 3,600-year orbit proposed by Sitchin doesn't align with the younger Dryas timeline, but the 10,000 to 20,000-year orbit calculated for Planet 9 does. If Planet 9's perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, occurred around 12,800 years ago, and its orbit takes roughly 15,000 years, then we're overdue. The window is closing. The object is returning. This changes everything about how we approach the search. We're not just looking for a distant curiosity. We're tracking an active threat, and the evidence suggests we're already seeing its effects. Start with the Sun. Our star has been behaving strangely. Solar activity follows an 11-year cycle, predictable and well documented. But in recent decades, the cycle has weakened. Solar minimum, the period of lowest activity, has been deeper and longer than expected. The Sun's magnetic field has dropped to levels not seen in over a century. Some physicists have suggested we're entering a grand solar minimum, similar to the Maunder minimum of the 17th century, which triggered the Little Ice Age. But what if the Sun's behaviour isn't internal? What if it's responding to an external gravitational influence? A massive body passing through the outer solar system would exert a tidal force on the Sun itself, potentially disrupting the dynamo that generates its magnetic field. The Sun would dim, its protective heliosphere would shrink, and Earth would be exposed to increased cosmic radiation. Then there's the magnetic field. Earth's magnetic North Pole has been accelerating towards Siberia at unprecedented speeds. For most of recorded history, it drifted slowly, moving only a few miles per decade. But since the year 2000, it's been racing forward at nearly 40 miles per year. The magnetic field itself has weakened by about 9% globally over the past 170 years, with some regions, particularly the South Atlantic anomaly, showing drops of up to 30%. This isn't a gradual drift, it's an exponential acceleration. Mainstream science attributes this to chaotic fluctuations in Earth's molten iron core, but the timing is suspicious. A pole shift doesn't happen overnight, but it also doesn't announce itself centuries in advance. The precursor signs are exactly what we're seeing now: rapid polar motion, field weakening, and the expansion of magnetic anomalies. The geological record shows that full magnetic reversals, where north and south flip, occur roughly every 200,000 to 300,000 years. The last one was 780,000 years ago. We're overdue by 500,000 years. But reversals aren't the only concern. Excursions, temporary flips that last a few thousand years before reverting, happen more frequently. The Lachamp excursion, 42,000 years ago, saw the field drop to just 6% of its current strength. During that period, Earth was bombarded with cosmic rays. Cave paintings from that era show red ochre handprints, possibly human attempts to shield themselves with iron-rich pigments. Megafauna went extinct. The climate destabilized. If a gravitational intruder can trigger or accelerate these events, we're watching it happen in real time. Look at the increase in seismic and volcanic activity. While scientists debate whether there's a true global increase or simply better detection, the perception is undeniable. Major earthquakes magnitude 7 or higher seem more frequent. Volcanic eruptions that were dormant for centuries are reactivating. Yellowstone's caldera is rising. Iceland's volcanoes are waking. The Ring of Fire, that horseshoe of seismic zones circling the Pacific, is more active than it's been in decades. Skeptics argue this is within normal variance, but if a massive object is approaching, its gravity would begin stressing Earth's crust long before it became visible. The planet would groan under the strain, releasing energy through its weakest points, fault lines and volcanic vents. Then there's the weather. Climate change is real, driven by human activity, but some of the patterns we're seeing don't fit neatly into carbon-based models. The jet stream, the river of air that governs weather across the northern hemisphere, has become erratic. It's meandering, creating blocking patterns that trap extreme weather in place. We're seeing droughts that last years, floods that break thousand-year records, and temperature swings that defy seasonal norms. Polar vortex events are dragging Arctic air into temperate zones. Hurricanes are intensifying faster than models predict. While greenhouse gases explain part of this, there's an element of chaos that suggests an external influence. If the sun's output is fluctuating and Earth's magnetic shield is weakening, the upper atmosphere would be destabilized. The delicate balance of atmospheric circulation would shift unpredictably. Now consider the astronomical anomalies. The Kuiper belt objects we discussed aren't the only oddities. There are trans-Neptunian objects with orbits so extreme they shouldn't exist. 2012, VP 113, nicknamed Biden, has an orbit that takes it 80 astronomical units from the Sun at its closest. That's twice the distance of Pluto. Sedna's orbit is even more absurd, reaching 937 astronomical units at aphelion. These objects are gravitationally detached from Neptune. Nothing in the known solar system can explain how they got there. The only logical answer is a massive shepherd, a Planet 9 or something even larger, sculpting their paths. And then there's the Pioneer anomaly. The Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft, launched in the 1970s, experienced an unexplained deceleration as they left the solar system. While officially attributed to thermal recoil, some researchers remain unconvinced. The anomaly was tiny, a force equivalent to the pressure of a handful of photons. But it was consistent and measurable. If a massive body exists in the outer solar system, its gravitational pull, however faint, would create exactly this kind of drag. The spacecraft were slowing down because they were climbing out of a gravity well we didn't know existed. The conspiracy deepens when you look at what's being built. Deep underground bunkers, officially for nuclear contingency or continuity of government, have been expanded massively in recent decades. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, built into a mountain in the Arctic, holds seeds for every major crop on Earth. It's framed as insurance against agricultural collapse. But why the urgency? Why now? Projects like SpaceX's push for Mars colonization are presented as humanity's next frontier, but Elon Musk himself has said we need to become a multiplanetary species to survive. Survive what? He's never fully explained the existential threat he's referencing. Perhaps he knows what's coming. There's also the strange behavior of the ultra-wealthy. In the past decade, billionaires have been buying massive tracts of land in remote locations. New Zealand, Patagonia, the mountains of Montana. They're building self-sufficient compounds with renewable energy, water supplies, and food production. These aren't vacation homes. They're survival bunkers disguised as estates. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, has invested heavily in Blue Origin, his private space company. Richard Branson has Virgin Galactic. These men aren't just chasing profit, they're building escape pods. Then there's the militarization of space. The United States established the Space Force in 2019, the first new military branch in over 70 years. Officially, it's to protect satellites and counter threats from adversaries. But what if the real threat isn't another nation? What if it's something approaching from deep space? The Space Force's focus on tracking objects and monitoring the solar system takes on a darker significance if they're watching for an intruder. Classified telescopes like those operated by the National Reconnaissance Office are pointed not just at Earth, but outward. What are they looking for? The scientific community is caught in a bind. Those who suspect something is wrong face a choice. Speak out and be labelled alarmist, or stay silent and risk being unprepared. A few brave voices have tried to sound the alarm. Astronomer Robert Harrington, before his untimely death, warned that Planet X was real and incoming. Geologist Robert Schoch has argued that the Sphinx's water erosion proves advanced civilization existed long before the accepted timeline. Graham Hancock has spent decades presenting evidence of a global cataclysm that reset humanity. These researchers are dismissed as fringe, but their evidence is compelling. The establishment's response isn't to refute the data, it's to attack the credibility of those presenting it. This is the final layer of the cover-up. It's not just about hiding a planet, it's about hiding what that planet represents, the fragility of our existence and the cyclical nature of catastrophe. If the public understood that civilization has risen and fallen multiple times, that we're not the pinnacle but merely the latest iteration, the entire structure of modern society would be called into question. Religion would fracture. Governments would lose legitimacy. The social contract, built on the promise of progress and security, would dissolve. The lie is told to maintain order, but order built on ignorance is brittle. So what happens when the intruder arrives? The first phase would be invisible to most. Astronomers would detect it years before it became visible to the naked eye. Governments would classify the information immediately. There would be no announcement. Instead, we'd see a quiet acceleration of preparation. More bunkers, more seed vaults, more private space launches. The wealthy would begin disappearing, relocating to their remote compounds. Markets would show strange patterns as insiders quietly liquidated assets and moved resources into tangible goods. Land, gold, survival infrastructure. The second phase would begin when amateur astronomers started noticing a new bright object in the southern sky, growing slowly but steadily. Social media would explode with speculation. Governments would issue denials, claiming it's a comet or a satellite. But as the object grew brighter, undeniable, the truth would leak. Panic would set in. Borders would close, cities would empty, as people fled to perceived safety. The global economy would collapse within days. The third phase would be the event itself. Gravitational tides pulling on Earth's crust, earthquakes shattering cities, volcanoes erupting in chains, the magnetosphere flickering as charged particles from the intruder's tail interact with Earth's field. Auroras would blaze across the equator, beautiful and deadly. The sky would burn. And then the floods, tidal waves, not from the ocean, but from the crust itself shifting, displacing entire seas, coastlines redrawn in hours, islands submerged, mountains rising, and after, a new world. The survivors, scattered and traumatized, would emerge into a planet transformed. The climate would be unrecognizable, the geography rewritten. Technology, dependent on satellites and power grids, would be gone. Knowledge would have to be preserved in the oldest way, through story, ritual, and stone. The survivors would become the ancients of the next cycle. They would carve warnings into mountains, encode the timeline into myths, and pray that their descendants, thousands of years hence, would be wiser. This is the true meaning of Nibiru. Not a planet, but a cycle. Not a myth, but a memory and a prophecy. The question isn't if it's coming. The question is whether we'll recognize the signs in time to prepare, or whether, like those before us, we'll ignore the warnings until the sky itself cracks open. The clock is ticking, the orbit is closing, and the ancient enemy of our species, the cosmic reset button, is making its long, slow return to the inner solar system. But what if we're asking the wrong question entirely? What if Nibiru isn't something we need to survive, but something we need to understand? The entire framework we've been operating under, the paradigm of cosmic threat and planetary destruction, might be the final layer of misdirection. Because there's another possibility, one that's been hiding in plain sight within the very text that started this entire investigation. Go back to the Sumerian tablets, read them again, but this time without the filter of fear. The Anunnaki didn't just come to mine gold, they came to elevate. Yes, they created a worker species, but they also gave us language, mathematics, agriculture, and law. Enki, the scientist who crafted our DNA, is consistently portrayed as humanity's protector, our advocate against the harsh judgment of Enlil. When the flood came, he saved us. When we were to be abandoned, he intervened. What if the return of Nibiru isn't an apocalypse but a graduation ceremony? What if the cataclysms, the resets, the destructions are not punishments, but examinations? Each cycle, humanity rises, and each cycle, we're tested. Do we learn? Do we evolve beyond our violent, self-destructive nature? Do we become worthy not of survival, but of ascension? The geological catastrophes might be inevitable, baked into the physics of a 3,600-year elliptical orbit. But how we respond to them, that's the variable. The civilizations that fell from Atlantis to the Bronze Age empires failed not because of the cosmic event itself, but because they were unprepared, divided, spiritually bankrupt. They had forgotten their origins. They had lost the knowledge encoded in their own myths. We are different. For the first time in this cycle, we have the capacity to remember. We have technology that can preserve information beyond stone and story. We have the ability to observe the cosmos with precision our ancestors could only dream of. We have global communication, allowing us to share knowledge instantaneously across the entire planet. If the test is whether humanity can transcend its fragmented, tribal nature and act as a unified species, we finally have the tools to pass. Consider the synchronicities. Why is this knowledge surfacing now? Sitchin's books, the discovery of distant planetary anomalies, the revival of ancient astronaut theories, the explosion of interest in consciousness and alternative history. These aren't random. They're symptoms of a species preparing itself, a collective, unconscious, waking up to an ancient memory. The information wants to be known. The disclosure is happening, not from governments, but from the zeitgeist itself. The cover-up in this light becomes less sinister and more tragic. The elites hiding in their bunkers, hoarding resources, planning their escape, they're repeating the exact mistake that doomed previous civilizations. They think survival is a matter of wealth, technology, and isolation. But the survivors of past cataclysms weren't the richest or most powerful. They were the most adaptable, the most cooperative, the ones who preserved knowledge and shared it freely. The preppers building fortresses are building tombs. The true ark is consciousness, community, and wisdom. There's a phrase that appears in mystery schools and esoteric traditions across cultures. As above, so below. It means the macrocosm reflects the microcosm. The movements of the heavens mirror the movements within the soul. If Nibiru's orbit is a cosmic clock, then perhaps it's also a metaphor. Its long elliptical path takes it far from the light of the sun into the cold outer darkness before swinging back. This is the journey of the soul, of consciousness itself. We descend into matter, into forgetting, into the density and struggle of physical existence, but the orbit always curves back. We return to the light, transformed by the journey. The return of Nibiru, then, is not just a planetary event, it's a spiritual one. It's the moment when the veil thins, when the separation between the physical and the cosmic dissolves. When our creators return, they're not coming as conquerors or saviors. They're coming as witnesses. They want to see what we've become. Have we transcended the slave programming? Have we awakened to our true nature as fragments of the divine, wearing flesh temporarily? Or are we still mining their gold, metaphorically speaking, serving systems of control and exploitation without question? This reframes everything. The gravitational chaos, the geological upheaval, these become initiation rites. Fire purifies, water cleanses, destruction precedes rebirth. Every spiritual tradition understands this. The phoenix burns to rise again. The seed must die to become the tree. What looks like an ending is actually a transformation. Now let's bring this back to something tangible. Forget prophecy for a moment. Look at our current trajectory as a species. We're facing ecological collapse, resource depletion, societal polarization, and technological disruption on a scale that mirrors the descriptions of past cataclysms. We don't need a rogue planet to destroy us. We're doing a fine job ourselves. Climate change alone could trigger mass migrations, food shortages, and conflicts that dwarf anything in recorded history. But here's the twist. These crises are forcing us to evolve. Renewable energy, decentralized systems, global cooperation on existential threats, these solutions are emerging precisely because we're being pushed to the edge. The crisis is the catalyst. Nibiru, whether it's a literal planet or a metaphorical representation of cyclical cosmic pressure, serves the same function. It forces evolution or extinction. The ancient texts say the Anunnaki will return when humanity is ready. Not when we're perfect, but when we're ready to choose, ready to see ourselves clearly, ready to take responsibility for our world and our future. The return isn't about them, it's about us. Consider the alternative. If there's no Nibiru, no hidden planet, no returning gods, what then? Does that make the story meaningless? Absolutely not, because the myth itself has done something profound. It's made millions of people look up at the sky and question the official narrative. It's made us study ancient texts, explore alternative history, and imagine possibilities beyond the narrow confines of mainstream thought. It's reconnected us to the cosmos. Even if the literal planet doesn't exist, the idea of Nibiru has served its purpose. It's woken us up. And if it does exist, if Planet 9 is found and its orbit matches the ancient calculations, and we confirm through undeniable evidence that a massive object is on an inbound trajectory, then we face a choice. Do we panic and fragment, ensuring our own destruction? Or do we unify, pool our knowledge, prepare intelligently, and prove we've learned the lessons encoded in our myths? The Anunnaki supposedly created us with their DNA. That means we carry their potential. We're not just slaves, we're heirs. The gold we were mining wasn't just for their atmosphere, It was a metaphor for consciousness, for the refinement of the soul through labor and experience. We've been mining ourselves, extracting wisdom from suffering, transmuting the base material of existence into something luminous. The return, if it happens, won't be a judgment from outside. It'll be a mirror. We'll see reflected back to us exactly what we've become. If we've built a world of division, greed and destruction, that's what we'll face. If we've built a world of unity, wisdom, and compassion, that's what will be amplified. So what do we do? How do we prepare for an event that might be decades away, or might be tomorrow, or might be entirely symbolic? First, we stop waiting for external salvation, or fearing external doom. No government, no guru, no alien race is going to save us. We save ourselves by becoming the people capable of surviving and thriving through transformation. Second, we preserve knowledge. Not just technical knowledge, but wisdom. The understanding that we're part of a cycle, connected to those who came before, and responsible to those who come after. We write it down. We encode it in art, in story, in practices that can survive the collapse of infrastructure. Third, we build resilience. Not bunkers, but networks. Communities that can support each other when systems fail. Skills that don't depend on electricity or supply chains. Relationships rooted in trust and mutual aid. Fourth, we elevate consciousness, meditate, create, connect with nature, unplug from the fear algorithms designed to keep us passive and divided. Remember that we're more than our bodies, more than our thoughts, more than the roles we've been assigned. And finally, we watch the sky, not in fear, but in wonder. Whether Nibiru arrives as a planet, a brown dwarf, or remains forever a ghost in the mathematics, the search itself has value. It reminds us we're citizens of the cosmos, not just residents of one fragile world. It reconnects us to the ancient human practice of looking up, asking questions, and seeking meaning in the movements of the heavens. The story of Nibiru is ultimately the story of us, a species with amnesia slowly remembering, a slave race gradually awakening to its divine inheritance, children of the stars preparing to meet our parents again, or to finally stand on our own. The planet may or may not be real, but the journey it's taken us on, from Sumerian clay tablets to cutting-edge astronomy, from conspiracy theory to spiritual awakening, that journey is undeniably real. And it's not over. The orbit continues, the cycle turns, and we, the seventh iteration of human civilization, stand at the threshold of becoming something new. The eighth age won't be built on the ashes of the seventh. It'll be built by those who carried the flame through the darkness and remembered why it mattered. The question was never whether Nibiru is coming. The question was always whether we'd be ready when it did. And the answer to that question is still being written right now in every choice we make. The tablets don't lie. The mathematics doesn't bend. The geological scars don't fade. Something happened to this planet repeatedly, and the survivors tried desperately to warn us. They carved it in stone, encoded it in myth, and preserved it in the most durable medium they had. Clay baked hard as the truth it contained. We've travelled from the birth of writing to the edge of our solar system, from genetic code to cosmic cycles, and everywhere we look, the pattern repeats. Not because we're forcing connections that don't exist, but because the connections were always there, waiting for a generation with the tools to see them clearly. The academic world will continue its slow, cautious dance around these ideas. Careers will be protected. Textbooks will remain unchanged. The official timeline will hold until it can't. But something has shifted, you can feel it. The questions that were once relegated to the fringe are now being asked by serious researchers with serious credentials. The evidence is accumulating faster than it can be dismissed. Whether Nibiru arrives in our lifetime or our grandchildren's, whether it's a planet or a brown dwarf or a mathematical ghost that exists only in orbital perturbations, the real transformation has already begun. We're remembering, not just intellectually, but cellularly. in the deep ancestral code that recognizes cosmic patterns even when the rational mind resists. The Anunnaki might have created us as workers, but they gave us something they couldn't take back: the capacity to evolve beyond our programming. Every act of creativity, every moment of transcendence, every choice to cooperate instead of dominate is evidence that we're becoming something they didn't plan for, something that might even surprise them when they return. The survival bunkers of the elite won't save them. The secret space programs won't be their escape, because the real test isn't about having the most resources or the best technology. It's about consciousness. It's about whether we can look at a cyclical catastrophe and see it not as punishment but as initiation. Whether we can face the destroyer and recognize it as the teacher it's always been. The sky is not falling, it's opening. The return isn't an invasion, it's a reunion with a part of ourselves we've forgotten. The gold we've been mining all along wasn't in the ground, it was in us, the alchemical transformation of base consciousness into something luminous, something worthy of the stars we came from. You're part of this. Whether you believe every word or remain skeptical, you've engaged with ideas that expand the possible. You've looked at ancient texts with fresh eyes. You've considered that the universe might be stranger, older, and more meaningful than the sanitized version we've been sold. That act of questioning, that willingness to sit with uncertainty and explore forbidden territories of thought, that's the real inheritance of the Anunnaki. The countdown continues, the orbit closes, the clock that's been ticking for 3,600 years, or 15,000 years, or since the beginning of time, moves forward regardless of whether we acknowledge it. But we're not helpless, we're not ignorant. We have the tablets, we have the mathematics, we have the memory encoded in our myths and our DNA, and most importantly, we have each other. When the moment comes, if it comes, those who survive won't be the ones who hid. They'll be the ones who prepared by becoming fully human, by remembering how to cooperate, create, and carry knowledge forward. They'll be the ones who looked at the evidence, refused the comfortable lie, and chose to live with the uncomfortable truth that we're part of something vastly larger than ourselves. The Sumerians are still speaking to us across 6,000 years. The megalith builders are still teaching us through their impossible stones. The cosmic clock is still ticking its ancient rhythm. And we, standing at this precise moment in the cycle, have a choice that no previous generation had. The choice to remember before we're forced to relearn. The return isn't something to fear. It's something to prepare for with wisdom, courage, and the understanding that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. The seventh age is closing. The eighth is waiting to be written. And you, reading these words, questioning these ideas, carrying this knowledge forward, you're already part of the answer. The Anunnaki may have made us, but what we become next, that's entirely up to us.